You just finish your encounter and you split all your loot, go to stick it in your bag of holding, and as you go to pull your hand out, you feel something. It's not glass or cold metal or a rope or rations, or 100 of the other weird and unuseful things that you've just kept because you're a secret hoarder. No, this is different. This almost feels like it's pushing back. That's the Bagman, and I want to talk about him today because I think he might be one of the most cleverly designed monsters in D&D, and honestly, probably one of the most underused. It's there tucked into the corners of Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, like a rumor the book doesn't want to fully explain. And if you just flick through the pages, you're going to miss it completely. But when you actually see it in those corners and sit there and read it for a little while, you can start to see why this works on a level that most monsters don't even attempt. So prepare yourself, children, and watch your fingers. So who even is this guy? The Bagman doesn't actually have a name. That's actually the first interesting thing about him. Once upon a time, he was an adventurer, a real one, presumably with a party and a quest and at some point a backstory. But whatever his name was, it's all gone now. Lost somewhere in the same place he got lost, which is a place called the Space Between Spaces. And from what we can piece together, he was in a fight, a bad one, and instead of standing with his party, he decides to climb into the bag of holding and pulled it shut behind him. Let's just wait for this to all blow over. Pop out when the coast is clear and loot whatever is left over. Not a bad plan, I guess, if you're into being a coward, but unfortunately the multiverse has a funny way of punishing that kind of thing, because when he tried to climb back out, it wasn't there. His original bag and world and everything was just gone. Or more accurately, not gone, but just completely inaccessible, because the space between spaces doesn't work like a room with a door you can just open and close when you feel like it. It's more like a city where every building looks the same and none of the streets have names. And you've been walking for so long you can't remember which direction you actually came from in the first place. He's been there for centuries now. Not that he would know that, so who knows how long it could be at this point. But it's long enough that the weird magic of this place has had its way with him. His mind and body twisted into something that's just unrecognizable. And what gets left behind is something that cycles endlessly through every magical storage space in existence, looking for a way home it can no longer recognize and dragging anything it finds back into the dark. Something that I really love about this lore is that he's not evil, he's not plotting or have hatred for all the adventurers with their magical bags that trapped him in the first place. He's just a creature that's made up of one emotion, desperate, confused longing. And I don't know why, but that makes him weirdly scarier, because you can reason with ambition and you can negotiate with things like greed, but you can't negotiate with something that has been alone in the dark for hundreds of years and has completely lost the thread of what it's looking for. And from a game design standpoint, the Bagman doesn't actually have a traditional stat block. Van Richten's doesn't hand you a neatly formatted card and say, here's your CR and your hit points, go nuts. Instead, it gives you something more like a recipe, which is actually quite brilliant, I think, because to me it means that every time he shows up in a game, he'll be completely different. An urban legend with 1,000 stories, and nobody knows which one's actually real, or maybe they all are. But what it does give you is the base of a troll, and the main reason for this was because of the regeneration, because when trolls heal, they heal fast and constantly, and anything that's stopping them from healing are fire and acid. Everything else just sort of bounces off eventually. And for the Bagman, this is thematically perfect, because the horror of the Bagman isn't one big confrontation, it's the fact that he comes back, you fight him off, he retreats into the bag, and then by the time your next long rest is done, he is healed completely and is still there, just waiting. And I find that kind of persistence really unsettling in a way that a monster you can just kill doesn't really achieve, you know? The second thing it gives is the amorphous trait, which you're borrowing from something like a black pudding or similar ooze. This is what lets large creatures squeeze in a gap that's like an inch wide, and immediately puts this image of this massive gangly creature that's all wrong shaped, pulling itself out of your bag impossibly, seam straining, one long fingered hand and then another, and then the limb that bends the wrong way, and then it just keeps coming until it's fully out, and it's absolutely horrifying. The third thing is the grappler. He's got advantage on attacks against anything he's already grabbed, which means once he has you, the situation escalates escalates pretty quick. His whole thing is abduction. He's not there to like kill you cleanly. He wants to pull you into his space between spaces, add you to his collection of lost things, and then go find someone else to grab. And then the last thing is the alien mind trait, which basically means that if one of the characters tries to read his thoughts, they get flooded with hundreds of years of fragmented grief and confusion and longing, and then they're gonna need a moment after that basically to compose themselves. The base build comes out around a CR5, but there's other versions. Shout out to Dungeon Dad who did fantastic work on this and pushed him to a CR10 with extra abilities. My personal favourite edition is something called the Despondent Wail, which is exactly what it sounds like, the sound of something that has been alone for longer than any of your player characters have been alive, finally having an audience. Anyways, I have to talk about this because this is the bit that elevates the Bagman from being a cool monster to genuinely elegant horror design, and that's the ritual that you do to call him out of the bag if you feel so inclined, which is whisper into the bag 3 times, follow my voice, and you basically invite him in. Now think about what that does at the table, because if you give your players agency over their own horror, it's opt-in. Nobody gets the Bagman dropped on them without at least having the option to not say the words. And it also means when someone does say the words, and someone always does because players are constitutionally incapable of not poking the scary thing, they make that choice. They have nobody to blame but themselves, which as any GM knows is so much better than the monster just showing up. Players who walked into something are way more engaged with the consequences than a player who feels like something happened to them arbitrarily. And think about what follow my voice actually means in other contexts. You say that to someone who is lost, like a child, or an ally that's in the dark, or someone who is scared and needs guidance. It's a phrase that's built entirely on trust and comfort and the promise that someone is coming to help you, and you're now using it to call a monster. The language doesn't just invite them, it fundamentally misuses something kind, which is, and I'll get into the folklore of this more in a second, extremely on brand for this type of horror. Now let's talk about liminality for a second, because I think this is the key to understanding why the Bagman design feels so current. Liminal spaces are the in-between spaces like hallways, empty airport terminals at 3 AM, the backyard after everyone else has gone inside, or stairwells and waiting rooms. These places feel wrong, not necessarily dangerous, exactly, but just off. Because they're designed for transition, not habitation. They're spaces that you're supposed to move through, not stay in them. And when you find yourself in one and you're not able to leave, your brain kind of quietly starts to panic. We've all heard of the Backrooms. That started as a single image, an empty office space, the specific yellow of fluorescent lighting on old carpet, and the hum of nothing, and it spiraled into this enormous collaborative mythology about what happens if you fall through the crack in reality into an infinite maze of empty spaces that go on forever. Nobody lives there, nothing good is there, and yet everything feels horribly familiar because we've all been in rooms like that. The Bagman lives in that. The space between spaces is exactly the Backrooms. It's a human-made system, magical storage, something built for utility and convenience, gone completely wrong, full of the accumulated cast-offs of 1,000 campaigns, lost items, forgotten potions, the remains of people who reached in at the wrong moment, and somewhere in all of that, this creature that has been there for so long it stopped being a person, still trying to find the right bag that leads home. And for me, right now, that resonates in a way that Dragon Horde just doesn't. The existential horror of infinite identical spaces, of being lost not in like a wilderness but in an infrastructure of convenience turning hostile. It's a very 21st century way of being scary. And D&D didn't invent the monster in the bag. What D&D did was find the version of it that fitted perfectly into the game's existing furniture. Terry Pratchett had the luggage, this magnificent, vaguely malevolent, sapient pearwood chest that follows its owner across dimensions, eats people who are rude, and cannot be discouraged from its path by anything in any known universe. The luggage is played mostly for laughs, but there is something genuinely unsettling underneath it. The thing that should carry your stuff should not have opinions about what happens to you. Kelly Link wrote a short story called The Fairy Handbag. It featured a bag made of dog skin, already a great start, that opened into a blood-soaked perfect pocket dimension with a vengeful spirit in it, much more in the horror lane. And then there's this whole thread of folk stories about containers that trap things, jars, boxes, bottles, all the way back to the story of Pandora. The idea that a vessel made for holding things might also hold something you absolutely did not want is ancient. It's literally baked into our brains about how we think about containers. And what Bagman does is take that and make it personal, because it's not some ancient curse on a mysterious box. It's your bag, the one that you use every single session, and the one that you picked up 3 sessions ago and have been stuffing full of loot without a second thought. And I personally think that the Bagman sits in a very specific tradition of folklore monster, the Boogeyman. And I don't mean a specific creature, I mean like the archetype, the shapeless scary thing that parents use to get children to behave. The cultures around the world have different versions of it that live in the closets, under the beds, in the dark, at the end of the hallway. But what's interesting is the academic study of the Boogeyman, and I promise this is the only time in the video I'm going to use the word academic. It's basically that there's been this documented shift over the centuries. Old boogeymen are hideous. You know, they're dangerous because they look dangerous, but modern boogeymen are charming. They're helpful, they offer something you want before the trap closes. The Pied Piper is charming. He's a musician. He solved your rap problem. He smiles, and the children follow him because why wouldn't they follow him? He seems wonderful. The horror only arrives when the debt comes due. The Bagman fits this template exactly. He isn't lurking in the woods or hiding under your bed. He's inside the thing that makes your life easier. He's the dark side of convenience, and the way you invite him by whispering into something that already makes you feel safe is perfectly calibrated to make you distrust the very thing that was keeping you comfortable. Now let's talk about running him. The Bagman shouldn't start with an attack. He is after all a horror monster, and horror monsters that start by attacking are just combat encounters with a spooky paint job. The Bagman should be a slow burn. You can seed him in first, like the player reaches in the bag for a rope, they find a rope, but they also find a charred shoe that wasn't there before. You show it to your party, but no one acknowledges it. You just describe it, let it sit. Maybe the bag feels heavier than it should for a moment, and then it doesn't. Maybe a player is rummaging through the bag for a potion and pulls out a spoon. It's all rusted, but it's not a recognizable material. Where did it come from? The bag feels strangely warm, and it's always been room temperature. You need to build that dread before you build a monster, and I find that's always the right order. Don't forget that there's a 10-minute rule with bag of holdings. That's how long a creature can breathe inside for. If you're actually going inside the bag of holding to get smuggled through somewhere, you need to make sure someone's actually counting that time. And rather than just killing your party off if they stay over that time period, maybe they meet the Bagman. And then you've got the black hole bomb problem. You know the one. I put the bag of holding inside another bag of holding. Players seem to love this for some reason. They think it's clever, and it actually is, to be fair. In like the rules, it says that it creates a rift to the astral plane. But in a world where the Bagman exists, this is catastrophically stupid. You're not just creating a rift, you're tearing a hole in the space between spaces. You're the magical equivalent of hitting a wasp's nest with a stick. Some other interesting ways to use him that I've seen is like, maybe a serial killer is taking advantage of the Bagman legend to get away with his murders. But when your party finally reaches up with him, the killer sticks his hand in the bag and pulls out the hand of the Bagman. Or maybe that the Bagman could be terrified of the entity behind the bag of devouring, and this could be used as a way to save the party once the Bagman is onto their scent. Or maybe the Bagman leaves trinkets behind through different bags as a way to remember where he's been, or as like a way he can locate those places again. I've also seen a few people calling the space between spaces the Backrooms, which I thought was pretty funny. You could literally run a whole campaign in the Backrooms. For me, the Bagman's backstory kind of just tells me that he's probably quite lonely, and he would definitely be more interested in kidnapping the party members rather than like killing them or taking their objects. He's probably got plenty of objects in his space between spaces, you know? So he's probably gonna take someone, and then they're gonna end up in his little hovel somewhere, and then there's gonna be other party members that are from other places, and they're all gonna be reenacting his original party as he's trying to like live out the way that it should have gone, you know? And I also see it as a bit of a cautionary tale, like loot isn't everything, and also running away from a fight and letting others do it for you doesn't always work, you know? I think a really interesting take would be to use it like Yuta and Rika from Jujutsu Kaisen. You could use the Bagman as a patron that's giving you power and is like obsessively afraid of being alone and is now latched on to the party member that's willing to take him. Imagine your fight going south and then you just call the Bagman out of the bag of holding. So what do you think about the Bagman? Have you you heard of him before? Did you notice him in Van Richten's guide? If you've used him before in your games, how did it go? What did you do? If you're a player, how did you find it? Let us know in the comments and let's start debating. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay spicy, adventurers.